Hello everyone, welcome to Module 3. My name is Hui Wang. I hope so far you find the modules are engaging and useful. Today we will continue discuss scientific reasoning. In the Module 1 and 2, we have discussed the evidence, evaluations, and inference. We have shared what is scientific reasoning, what is data and evidence in Module 1. In Module 2, we introduce 3 types of reasoning: deductive, inductive, and adductive reasoning. In this module, we'll focus on the last part of scientific reasoning, which is scientific investigation. We will talk about type of scientific investigation, also design and conducting experiments. Observation and experimentation are the 2 words that you probably very often use in your classrooms. Both observation and experimentation are considered as a way to conduct scientific investigation. There are different types of observation. For example, an investigator uses his or her sense, like sight and touch, to conduct observation. In this type of observations, the investigator documents what he or she sees, heard, or tastes. Sometimes, investigators could also use tools or instruments such as a microscope to help them observe things that might not be able to see from their naked eyes. For example, an entomologist counts how many bees visit a red flowers in 1 hour. That's this type of observation. Also, a scientist looking at the specimens from a microscope. That's also in this type of observation. Observation can also mean that an investigator consciously isolates certain aspects of phenomenon from their natural surroundings or from existing data that gather information. For example, a biologist classifies microorganisms that she found in a cornfield to determine what type of soil that we have in West Lafayette. Or a civil engineer compares city map to study how the West Lafayette sewage systems changed from 1915 to 2020. Observation does not involve changing any conductions of the phenomenon study. As for experimentations, it involves investigators consciously and voluntarily alert the conditions of the phenomenon study. Could you tell what type of a scientific investigation involved in here? We have 4 examples here. A zoologist puts her specimens into a microscope as she counts the blood cell of it. A horticulturist set up a red and blue light as he tests the growth rate of lettuce in 2 weeks. A hydrologist opens several sealed snowflakes at different points of the time into air as he examines the quality of air enters the flakes. A pathologist arranged medical record as she searched for the patterns. Now, as you can see, if you get it right, the examples 2 and 3 involve consciously change the conduction of the phenomenon study, therefore their experimentation. Please note, to gather evidence, experimentation always involves observation. However, sometimes evidence can be gathered without experimentation, but only through observations, like the example 1 and 4. Whether you are doing observation or experimentation, you are conducting scientific investigation. That's using Delphi murder as examples to explore further about scientific investigation. Daniel Nations was one of the suspects of the Delphi murder. Please review your worksheets in Module 1 and 2. In the Uncovered website, you can find Daniel Nations was arrested in Woodland Park, Colorado in September 2017. He had an outstanding warrant under his name, including commit sex crimes that made him a registered sex offender. He was transferred to Indiana officials' custody on an unrelated charge of Delphi murder in late January 2018. He was removed from the list of primary suspects of the Delphi murder in early February 2018. Now, why Daniel Nation was considered as an active person of interest in the Delphi murder? Some possible reasons that might make Daniel Nations one of the suspects in Delphi murders are: he resembles a composite sketch of the man police believe killed the girls. Other possible reasons were, at the time of the killing, Daniel Nations was living 2 hours away from Delphi in Indiana. He served 4 years in the Marine but was discharged General under honorable. He legally has access to a weapon, a .22 caliber rifle, in his vehicle. He failed to register as a sex offender in Indiana. After Daniel Nations was released, he was interviewed by a reporters. He told the reporters when he was questioned by the Indiana police that he has never visited Delphi, even he lives in Indiana. He has never owned a car. He also gave permission to the authorities to take his DNA sample. His wife also told media that she believed she had a doctor appointments to do ultrasounds on February 13, 2017, and Daniel was with her. Those are the possible reasons might help rule out Daniel Nations as an active person of interest in the Delphi murder. In a press conference, Superintendent Carter was questioned by reporters why they released Daniel Nation. He said, "As you all know, we went out to Colorado and we spent a little bit of time with him, Daniel Nation. And he is not a person we care a whole lot about this time." Superintendent Douglas Carter with the Indiana State Police says, "Until somebody is arrested, we're interested in almost everybody. If you are interested in watching in this press conference, I provide a link in this slide. You can click the link and watch the conference." So, basically, very limited information was released by the Indiana police why Daniel Nations was no longer a primary suspect of Delphi murder case after February 2018. Based on what you learned, if you are Superintendent Carter, what compelling evidence do you need to make this statement? Do you have a hypothesis? What scientific investigation you need to conduct to help you support or refute the hypothesis or acquire new informations? How will you design a scientific investigation that systematically tests your hypothesis or acquire new informations? Now, please pause the module here and think about those questions. Resume the module after you have some answers for these questions. I provide some example answers of my thinking. We can make an observation about what Nation says. I have never visited Delphi. My hypothesis is if Daniel Nation had never visited Delphi, there should not be any records showing that he had any activities near or at Delphi, and he should pass a polygraph test. I will collect a little bit more evidence, maybe for example, his critical records for the past of 3 years, and also maybe ask him to conduct a polygraph test. We can conduct an experiment to test Daniel Nation's DNA sample. My hypothesis is if Daniel Nation is not a suspect who murdered the girls, his DNA should not match anything that we found, like in the crime scene. So I could conduct experiments to test Daniel Nation's DNA. The evidence could be I compare Daniel Nation's DNA samples with any DNA samples that might have found at the crime scene. Hopefully so far you had a better understanding about observation and experimentation. Besides observation and experimentations, there are other components that relate to scientific investigation. First, a textbook question is the first step of forming a hypothesis. A textbook question is based on evidence. A textbook question can be measured and observed through scientific investigation. Inquiry motivates the students to generate a textbook question. Therefore, a textbook question is connected to the inquiry process. A yes or no question is not a textbook question. A why question might not be textbook question because they might not be answered by direct observation or by evidence gathered through experimentation. A hypothesis is also an important component to conduct a scientific investigation. After students has a textbook question, the next step is to form a hypothesis. A hypothesis is an assumption about a possible answer or solution based on the limited evidence as a starting point for further investigation. Some teachers also referring hypothesis as an educational guess. After a student has a hypothesis, the next step is to design an experiment. This process involving develop appropriate experimental procedure that might have dependent, independent, and control variables. Dependent variables are variables will be observed and measured in scientific experiment. Independent variables are variables that will be changed in a scientific experiment. Control variables are variables that will be kept the same to avoid affecting the scientific experiment. Besides develop an appropriate experimental procedure to answer the research question, a student also needed to develop an appropriate data collection plans to answer the research questions. Now, let's reflect on the Module 3. What is the distinction between observation and experimentation? Do all scientific investigations have a hypothesis? Please explain it. Can all scientific questions be answered through conducting experiment? Please explain it. How does scientific reasoning, Module 1 and 2, play a role in scientific investigation in this module? Please complete those reflection questions in the Google Classroom. Now you wonder, how can I use what I learned from Module 1, 2, and 3 in my teaching? In the next module, we will focus on how scientific reasoning and investigation could be used in your classroom. We will use hydroponics as an example to demonstrate how to apply scientific reasoning and investigation in your class and incubation design challenges. This is the reference for this module. Hopefully, this module makes you think about the relationship between scientific investigation and evidence evaluations. The project is funded by USDA NIFA to promote STEM and agricultural literacy. I'd like to thank Dr. Nablas and graduate students Brianna who reviewed the module and give constructive feedback. Also, Dr. Crystal Haynes, who helped review the content and ensure that I provide accurate information about the Delphi murder in the module. Thank you for watching the module. Feel free to contact me if you have any more questions.